chance to interact with you again. Have a good show uh, for you. Um, One of the things I wanted to do was just to give you an overview of what was covered last week, or at least the series on the Haitian Revolution, not to review it, but just to stress the purpose of those two shows. The main purpose of those two shows was to um, give you a kind of an introduction to looking at African identity and African American and African Caribbean identity through the lens of the popular culture of the people in the United States and in the Caribbean. And so the focus was on um, Creole culture or African culture in the Caribbean, the culture carried from Africa to the Caribbean and then adapted and call that Creole, which is heavily African based with some European penetration and some Native American. And so that was to give you an off the top view of the sixfold stages to mental freedom to look at particularly the cultural base of everyday people, the everyday people of the Caribbean, the everyday people of Afro America, or I call New Africa or New African culture. And what you should have seen from that is the strengths of this culture far outweigh its weaknesses, and you'll see it if you haven't drank the Kool-Aid coming from white mystifiers and a lot of blacks who have bought into it, that particularly in the United States, blacks have lost their culture. Or in the Caribbean, I've seen some of our scholars say that the culture of Africans in the Caribbean is broken. Eh, you know, it has holes, it has contradictions, and we covered some of those, but it's a solid culture. It carried a people from slavery to being the only people in the world that could free themselves from enslavement. So that has to be pretty strong. And the new African culture created here by Africans in America is the most popular culture in the world. And it has also given birth to the popular art form of the world, and it's given birth to the classical art form of the world, which is jazz. You know what I mean? So we have issues coming out of enslavement. And I would say in the Caribbean, particularly with Haiti, the biggest issues are with the elite, and particularly that elite post the independence movement after they secured their freedom from enslavement, who looked out for their own interests over and above the interests of the people. That was the biggest issue. And a lot of our scholars who are taking an African American analysis and trying to analyze a place like Haiti haven't analyzed this place too well, because some of them had bought into the Willie Lynch syndrome. And then they transfer that knowledge and that analysis to the we sick thing of the Caribbean. We're pretty healthy people. See, health is by comparison. Who's healthier, us or the people who enslaved us? A, number one. And A, number two, how is it we come out of enslavement with our humanity intact, with scars, with issues? I don't deny them. And for some of our people, they're extreme. But for most of our people, they're in the normal category with issues. All human beings have them. And in our case, part of it arises from oppression. And then, of course, those things that come with being human, which everybody's got issues with being human. We ain't none of us perfect. That's why we're here, to get closer to God. So that's a primary purpose for looking at the Haitian Revolution and two Africans, Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, and Ella Baker from North Carolina. And we had a representative sample of African culture in three regions: Caribbean, United States, Africa. and coming from different stages of identity. So that was the overall purpose of looking at that. And one of the reasons that Africans have done much better than we think in this world, and particularly Africans in the US and the Caribbean, is that we draw from the oldest culture in human history, African culture. And I say culture, not cultures, even though there are variations, there's a common cultural unity that they share. And this makes this culture the most endurable and the most resilient. And one thing you can say about Black folks, wherever they are, we're pretty resilient. Some of us can go way down and come back up. You hear me? Some don't come up. They go down and they collapse. But in the majority of our cases, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't true that the majority of our people proved resilient and could overcome. You know what I mean? And so that's a great strength of our people, the essence of which is our great humanism, our great humanism. And so looking at the Haitian Revolution, and particularly in the context of looking at Toussaint Louverture, that gave you a picture of that, but also Ella Baker, who's a shining example of the best features of African-American culture. There's a whole lot of Black folks like her. Of course, not everybody in her category. I mean, you know, one of the two best organizers coming out of the 60s, and with a philosophy of organizing that is best suited to today. And a sister who made no compromises, you know, not to mention Amilcar Cabral, the baddest leader in the 20th century, in my opinion. Remember, I have no stakes in this. I don't come from Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. I wear a goatee because Malcolm wore one. So why wouldn't I say Malcolm was the best? I'm a scholar. I look at this objectively. And based on objective analysis, he just beats the whole lot of leaders, and there's some bad ones to beat, like Ho Chi Minh. Bad. Brother who was so committed to his people in Vietnam that when he died, he put all his possessions in a duffel bag. That meant he wasn't out to take the wealth, lived in the servants' quarters while he was president of Vietnam. The servants' quarters. What does that tell you? You know what I mean? Huh? Born on the same birthday as Malcolm X. El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. Baddest brothers, period. One of the best minds. That was John Henry Clarke's conclusion, mine and a whole bunch of others. I would say the best political mind we produced. Or Mao Zedong or Fidel Castro. We were talking global here, you know what I mean? Amilcar Cabral, the best. And he come out of colonialism and the Cape Verdean people. You want to talk about brainwashed and Creole culture, boy, not just in the Creole culture of Haiti, i.e., the light-skinned Blacks who often didn't side with the people. That was pretty much Cape Verde. You know what I mean? He came out of that and transformed it through the sixfold stages to mental freedom. Transformed it. Too bad the rest of them didn't. You know, Guinea-Bissau would be in much better condition. So I was looking at Toussaint through the lens of the popular culture of the people of the Caribbean, because this popular culture produced the only victory against slavery in the whole wide world's history. You hear me? In the whole history of the world. Because every people have been enslaved. The word slave comes from Slavic. They were enslaved. You had slaves in Rome. They were most of them white. You know what I mean? The Greeks had slaves. All of them. Who succeeded? These Africans in Haiti. But we're going to run around talking about they got a broken culture. The elite has a broken culture. The masses have got issues, but it wasn't the masses who signed onto that reparations imposed by France. It was the elite. It isn't the masses who are living good. It's the elite. It's not the masses who are out there fighting every day against the UN against America and all these other forces that are messing their country up, it's not the elite that are doing that fighting, it's the masses. So, sick? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Issues? We all got them. You hear me? And certainly slavery brought out theirs. But that was another main reason for looking at Haiti, giving major attention to it. But there was a special reason for looking at Toussaint Louverture, is because he's received a bad rap in history. The rap on him has been that he was an integrationist. Most of our best scholars have bought that rap because they picked up on that from C.L.R. James, Black Jacobins, and that was a classic work. And they just didn't bother to dig deeply enough into Toussaint. And as I said before, Desalaine's my favorite. So I wasn't doing this because I got a personal axe to grind here. He's just an exceptional leader when it comes to the history of the world. It took the Haitian people, it took a cross-section of leadership to produce that victory. And it was especially the culture that they drew from. But the one leader that was exceptional above all others was Toussaint, negotiating with and maneuvering and fighting the Spanish, the British, and the strongest army on land at that point in the world, the French, under Napoleon. And he defeated them. His armies did, but under his direction, and then under Desalaine's, because Desalaine was the second best general, and in certain ways better because he didn't make some mistakes that Toussaint made that I discussed when I went through this. So that people who had gone through this savage enslavement that is what we experienced in the US and the Western Hemisphere, the most savage in the history of the world, because these enslavers had a view of us that wasn't just that we were captives, but that we were not human. And so they visited on us terrible forms of inhumane treatment. And yet we come out fierce, and when we had the power, getting revenge. Of course, you're told you shouldn't do that. Why not? Hey, I'm not a revenge person, but I'm into justice, not just iced like you get here, justice. And I've been fortunate not to have situations that I have to carry around. I've been able to correct the injustices in my life. Some people have not. That's a hard thing to carry around. And then to tell people you're supposed to forgive your enemies who don't even want to be forgiven. God doesn't forgive them. If you've committed murder, your sad behind's going to hell. But we're going to forgive somebody that doesn't want to be forgiven. And if you let them loose, they're going to keep on killing. And I'm not opposed to forgiving. After a person has gone through remorse, after they've changed, then it's your choice. And then you're not going to be letting loose somebody who's going to do it again. But that's your choice. And if you choose not to, I say fine. And if you choose to, I say fine. Because that's your choice. I ain't got nothing to say on it. So what was amazing about Toussaint and amazing about the people of Haiti and amazing about African people in general is they came out with so few flaws. And Toussaint, you hear me? He had flaws. That's what got him on the boat and got him in jail. Some of that was arrogance, in terms of he had to run everything. But running everything up to a point was almost necessary because he had the brilliance of strategy and he knew every inch of that island, that when you got some battle orders from Toussaint, and he wasn't like most generals hiding, he was right out in front on his horse, best horseback rider in the country, or one of the best. And so he was out there putting his life on the line with his people. So he was an amazing, exceptional individual. And so he had faults, and these faults arose from slave complexes, but not from assimilation. Yes, political assimilation, not cultural assimilation, and a mixed bag on the spiritual thing. But his spirituality was voodoo. The religion that got him somewhat messed up was Catholicism. That is, believing in brotherhood and stuff with people who aren't going to practice brotherhood with you. So those were his weaknesses. So that was the point. The point is, we are mighty, mighty people, and that we can throw forward stuff like this, and that armies of blacks with no formal military training in the Western sense. Now remember this, 60% of the Haitians came directly from Africa. They had training. And we're going to talk about where that training comes from today, because the topic for today is Dogon and African American mastery systems are the same. And it's these mastery systems are the ones that come straight out of Africa, came straight out of. And then they continued it in Haiti through secret societies that were carried from Africa, which, by the way, was a predominant form of organization in America. Most of you don't know that. I study secret societies here. And it was one of the ways in which this mastery system was conveyed. And also revolt was hidden. And spies did their work during the Civil War. Talked about it before. So this is something that, we cannot ignore. And so that was the purpose of this, to give you a little high point on what would be Black culture in the United States that Ella Baker came out of, and would be Creole culture that Toussaint L'Ouverture came out of, and assimilationist culture that Amilcar Cabral came out of. Interesting, the one that came out of Africa came out of assimilation. So did I. So it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where your head was at. And then it's a question of getting it wrapped on right. You know what I mean? So that was the point of that. And the main thing is I wanted to give him his proper dues, both positive and negative, but weigh him out, but also salute him and salute the people that produced that. Now, just a few things on the show. For the past couple of months, we've been making improvements on the show, thanks to Brother Ogawa. Many of you that watch the show, I know you've been talking to your friends and stuff. And I want to welcome Brother Michael Guess, Boli Kaja, Ali Tofe. Welcome you as well. Carnita Groves, if I missed you before. LaShonda Henderson, I may have missed you. You came on a little later. And Lisa Grayson, I think I got you, but if I didn't. All of you have helped really build this show because you've been dedicated, and I'm sure you've talked to your friends and whatnot, and I hope you're getting something out of this. But we've been doing other things to make improvements to the show. Brother Ogawa has done consistent work on other platforms to bring viewers in, especially Twitter, and that's helped. Then I told you a couple of weeks ago that a former student of mine, Lawrence Freelo, who's now in Asia, he'll be there for another month or so, who's a former student of mine, and I got him into the master's program at San Francisco State with the help of a guy named Ken Montero, who was dean of the College of Ethnic Studies, and he got an MBA and a master's degree. That's a double kind of thing in computer technology, and it's in management of computer technology. So he looks at the overall thing. So he's given me a lot of advice that I'm following. And so one of them is, he was the first to tell me that there's a category of people that work on just, recruiting subscribers. And I told you about this before. And that's different from people who just go out and do ads for a show that you have to pay for. These people who are trained in recruiting subscribers are into getting what you call organic viewers. Organic viewers are people who come to your show because they're interested. And since there's billions of people watching on this wide thing called the internet and various platforms, you have to be able to zero in to find viewers that have your interests. And so once he told me that, I went out looking and hired a firm. And so for the past 8 days, we've been running uh, subscription a subscription campaign as well as a viewer campaign to up both the subscribers and the viewers. And I would note that right now, this week, we had 100 more people clocking in after a week of viewing last week's show. That's good. And that's a part of the first part of this campaign and then other work we've done. So I looked at all the previous shows we've done, looked at the analytics, and I'm always looking at the analytics because they provide just about everything on viewers. And so I picked the Dr. Theophilo Benga conversation that he and I had as the show that you would put out there to draw more viewers. And at the time I picked that show had about 6,753 views, which is pretty good. It's been on for a year. For this show, that's good. And these were long-term viewers too. I mean, long-time viewers. They watched for a long time. And so one of the things that's happening when this show comes on, then there are people who come to this show that will then check out other shows. And usually the increase in subscribers comes from people clicking into one of those. You know, that's where usually the most of the increase is coming from. So that's the main reason that I picked Dr. Benga. One is because it was a large viewership. It was one of our best shows, without doubt. And he also had a reach into 7 countries: the United Kingdom, South Africa, France, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, and Singapore. Now that sounds impressive, but in our show, we reach a lot more countries than that. So also I wanted to broaden his reach, and which means broaden the reach of the show as well. So what we then did is do this outreach. And so through this subscription drive. And what we found, these are the overall things that have happened with this outreach. Dr. Abenga's views have gone from 6,753 to 19,061 in 8 days. I had to pay for this, but the point is, you're not buying viewers. These are people we've identified who are interested in the show. You know what I mean? And that's why they've come in. And one of the interesting things when you look at the analytics is that the likes, you know, the new people coming in and viewing, the likes equal the subscribers, which was telling you they're subscribing because they like the show, which is, of course, what you would expect. Now, when we started this show, this campaign, Dr. Obenga's viewers was in the more older age group, 45 to 54 years of age. 44% of his viewers were there. Then 55 to 64 years of age, 32% of his viewers were there. And then 65 and over, 24% of his viewers. Our profile is much younger. And if that's the way this was, I'd be canceling the show. Don't get me anything wrong, because 45 ain't bad. But I'm not into preaching to the choir. I want to reach new people, and I'm not opposed to older people. Look at me. I'm as ancient as the pyramids. So I'm not opposed to old, and there's plenty of wise out there. So you need that. I want everybody. But the key thing is the youth. You hear me? The youth. So one of the things we wanted to do was raise that age profile also, you know, for him, not for the show. We already have it. And so that you'll see in a minute work. So For the last 28 days, and this includes the period of this campaign for Dr. Obenga's show, it was really he and I, it was a conversation. 65%, but this is normal for the year because I've done this analytics for the year. For the last 28 days, 65.7% of the viewers on this show have been between the ages of 18 and 44 years of age, with the largest group of viewers between 18 and 34 years of age. Now, most shows would die for that. Our numbers need to go up on subscribers, but most shows don't have that. They are looking for corporate money. Now, the corporations will just die for this because these are the people who buy things. I don't plan to get any corporate support. Do y'all get this? I don't plan to. And I've paid a lot of money. I'd appreciate it if people would make a contribution. I ain't no preacher up here asking you to support me. I'm self-reliant. I've never taken a dime for any movement I've led. And if this show's going to grow, it's got to grow on Black steam and conscious steam wherever it comes from. But I ain't pushing no corporations. That's like pushing the plantation owner. They're the modern plantation owners for the planet. Huh? I fought corporations and beat them all my life. I fought the CIA and FBI and beat them all my life. Why am I going to promote them now? Huh? No. So some of you had made donations. I hope some of you consider doing this on a regular basis. You don't have to do a lot, what you can afford. And as we grow, we'll get more of that. So let me repeat this. For the last 28 days, 65.7% of the viewers on this show have been between 18 and 44 years of age. 65.7%. With the largest between 18 and 34 years of age, and the smallest viewership over 65. I was showing this to my wife, and she pointed to the 65. Boy, that number is real small. I'm glad to have as many 65 and over as possible. So don't get me wrong. I ain't putting that down. But you have to admit that we ain't doing nothing if we ain't putting this on to the younger generation and getting them involved. So that's just the last week. Now, so the viewership for this last 6 or 7 days for the Dr. Obenga show, which was being used to draw people into this overall show, grew from 6,753 to 19,061 viewers. Now, what you need to really realize is figure this one out. How long does it take us to get that many viewers to come onto this show? And it's not because people don't like it. They don't know about it. See, I did a thing in 1965. I was in the media everywhere. You know, my mother had scrapbooks. I didn't know she kept them. I wasn't keeping them. I got thick, fat scrapbooks of the movements that I led. You know what I mean? I was on TV 4 to 5 days a week for 5 years. I was hot stuff. I walked away when the CIA started manipulating the media. I didn't know who was doing it, but I only used the media for purposes. I walked away. So that's why I'm not as well known. And then when I became chair of Black Studies at San Francisco State, I was then hot running around the country. My book on Malcolm had come out. And then I became chair for 12 years. I had to stay there and really work to develop the department and beat off the attacks and everything else. So this is coming back. You know what I mean? This is coming back. So basically, if you're somebody that's been on CNN and you have a show, you're going to draw whatever 100,000 that watched you on CNN. If you're a national figure, you're going to do that. So this is part of what we have to do with the show. Do various things to draw people in. And right now, that is through some marketed campaigns to draw subscribers and viewers in. So it's gone from, in the last 6 days, 6,753 viewers to 19,061 viewers. Listen to this. Of this group, 25% are between 18 and 24. Hey. Listen to that. 28% are between 25 and 34 years of age. 22% are between 34 and 44 years of age, making 75% of our viewers between 18 and 44. And I know this because if I'm getting Facebook friends, you see their pictures. Most of them are young. And then they're calling me Baba. Seeing somebody calling you Baba, they're younger. And then some of them, because, when they Facebook, you often, you see their age and, 21, whatever, you know what I mean? Huh? So that's nice. Don't get me wrong. I think every age is good. So don't think I'm putting any age down. I'm just saying that was the aim of this show. This is a key thing. Now, we've increased the subscribers. We've done a huge increase of about 13,000 more viewers for this show, particularly through the Dr. Obenga and I interview or conversation, over 13,000 more viewers. And we've increased our subscribers by 70. You might not think that's a lot. Well, I haven't done the math yet, but I know it takes a long time, the way we've been growing this show, to get 70. And so we're not going to just use this as a way to increase subscribers, but this is one way that supplements it. So this is a part of what we're doing to grow the show. There are other things as well that we know we have to do, and any suggestions you all have, I would appreciate it. You know what I mean? I'd appreciate it. Now let's get down to the topic for today's show. See, a lot of these things, because I'm working on this book that will be coming out soon on Seba. Then I'm doing research on a new book that I've decided just recently that I'm going to write. And then I'm preparing for the next book, which will be on the San Francisco Freedom Movement. And at the last 2 weeks of next month, we'll be honoring one of the leaders of that movement, Dengani, Dogon Mastery, whose parents came from Cape Verde, who was born in Boston and was a leader in the San Francisco Freedom Movement and was a good friend of mine. And he wrote the introduction to my book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. So we'll be honoring the Black Arts Movement, which he played a leadership role in after leaving CORE and CORE. And so you're going to see some stuff on that. So the culture is going to be raised up in this case through the Black Arts Movement and the Black Freedom Movement. And that's also tied to what we're dealing with today, the Dogon and African American mastery systems being the same. Now, this is a big breakthrough here, this topic here, and it's a part of what is central to the book on Seba. Now, so what's going to be discussed today complements the discussion of sixfold stages to mental freedom. This one deals with the mastery side. The sixfold stages to mental freedom deals with the identity side and the stages of identity and how you deepen your identity as African people. And these cycles apply to people of color because they have also faced assimilation. The historical circumstances can vary, but it applies to them as well. But it has special application to us, given the historical circumstances that we've lived through. So the sixfold stages is about awakening. The system we're going to be talking about today is about mastery. They're connected, but it's about mastery. This isn't, one's linked, but they're not the same. So there's a relationship between the sixfold stages to mental freedom and the Dogon and African American mastery systems. And I'm going to show this through giving personal examples, what the relationship is, and then in other ways. But the personal examples are very important because if you see how someone else has gone through this, then you have a better understanding of how this could affect you, even though you may have a different skill set. Your purpose in life may be different because this mastery system is tied to your gifts and expressing them and becoming a master of them, as well as your character, improving it, because it's a dual system. One is connected to the other. So in my case, because of my particular interests and gifts and the passions that I have, my identity transformation and my mastery stemmed around my personal involvement in Black freedom movement, Black liberation movement, and my effort to transform and deepen my scholarship. In fact, when I underwent the awakening, the sixfold stages to mental freedom, I threw away most of Western miseducation, not just the facts, but as I came up under different systems, the systems. And that's really the key point. The sixfold stages was a way of disengaging from the brainwashing of Western miseducation. And it answers Carter G. Woodson's thing about, if we're taught the same philosophy and history and culture of the European, you put on remote control, you do their bidding without being told. So this is the way to free yourself from that. But it was more than that. It was about getting into different system of learning. And because I had seen what was wrong with this system, it wasn't just that it lied. It was a lot more. It was also the way in which it was structured. So I underwent first an awakening through the sixfold stages of mental freedom, which I didn't know that's what it was then, because I was just entering into it and nobody had ever explained this before. Some had experienced it, but they hadn't explained it. Most of them couldn't because they were too close to it, or they weren't into trying to. It was an experience, and that was sufficient for them. The awakening to African identity was connected to the desire to master certain things that happen to be of special interest to me, particularly waging war, organizing, strategy, and stuff like that, and scholarship. And so the identity awakening was connected to the move to mastery. Now, I want to stress this. There are people who are masters, in this case, Black folks who are masters of certain things and who are not clear on their identity. They're not clear on their identity. Colin Powell, I've given him as an example before. He may well have been destined to be a warrior, but for whose cause? And so his identity, being more Americanized, kind of dictated how he used his innate skills. You know what I mean? I would suggest for the wrong cause. But you can be a master without having gone through identity transformation. The chances are, if you haven't gone through identity transformation, you probably won't even be mastering under Black masters, and that would be a Colin Powell. Probably most of his masters in the military were white. Well, you'd say, well, yeah, they were most of the officers' corps and everything else. Yeah, well, if that's where your identity is, that's who you're going to look up to for models and examples. Now, the other thing is, when I'm using myself as an example, I'm doing it in part so that people can see how it applies to them. But also, I want to stress this, whether it's the sixfold stages to mental freedom or it's the Dogon and African American mastery systems, the way in which we learn them is through a way of total knowledge. That is a system of mind, body, and spirit, not through a despiritualized system that comes out of the West, where spirit's not included. And we'll see it's even more limited than that. And so the thing about both of these things, identity transformation and mastery, is it's a lifelong thing. It's not like a course. And that's why people who go through this can beat anybody else, because they put their whole being into it. You hear me? Western systems would like you to do that for them, and some of us are dumb enough to, but their systems are not really designed for the mind, body, spirit transformation. It's basically to get your mind. And if they got your mind, they got your behind. And by the time you figure it out, as the old song used to say, you're in a world of trouble. So my awakening came as a result of being involved in the Black Freedom Movement. And it started in my awakening in 1963, when Norman Brown, my vice chair, opened my eyes up. He'll be on the show at the end of the month talking about Dengani. So this awakening experience of going through various stages and sixfold stages to mental freedom enabled me to discover this path, and that was an innovation. Along with Bulalela Waboga, who I've talked about before. This is the only innovation I've done with someone else. And he was helpful because of his orientation, looking at Fanon and various other things. So this transformation of the sixfold stages to mental freedom came out of a day-to-day battle for liberation, where I was involved 24 hours a day for 10 years in this transformational process. And at the same time, it's what led me to begin to study my history and my culture. And I want to stress it was balanced. It was both African and African American, not just one, because you could not internalize the lessons you learned from your African history if you don't apply it to your African American reality, because this is the reality you live in. You couldn't get anything from an African past if it's just stored facts and information. You have to apply it to your African American present and then utilize it in your life. And so these two have to go together. So this is part of the connection between the Dogon and the African American mastery and sixfold stages systems, that through the Dogon system, what you do that's different from the sixfold stages. In the sixfold stages, you discover what it means to be African and New African or African American, what it means. In the mastery system, either you already know or you discover your special gifts or your purpose for being or your passion or passions in life. The things that make you the happiest that also benefit humanity, and usually are reflective of your gifts, your talents. The greatest joy in life, the greatest one is, first of all, being yourself, your African self, and then discovering what you're here for, and then trying to pursue it. Now, if you're able to do all three, that's where real happiness is. You hear me? That's real happiness. And to do that, you have to negotiate a lot of things. You have to negotiate other people telling you shouldn't do it. The hell with them. When you go to bed at night, when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, ain't nobody else there to look at you. The whole day, it's nobody else experiencing this but you. And if you're living according to someone else's expectations, that's a passport for misery. I don't care how good they are. It's like a good pair of shoes. They look good, they're expensive, they're shiny, but they hurt your feet. So other people will look at you. Of course, you probably be stumbling around if they hear it and say, oh, how nice they are. And all you're saying is, man, why did I buy these things? And some of us, we buy into lives that have nothing to do with our dreams and wishes. Now, some of us, it's because we have to make a living. So it doesn't mean that your passion in life is always going to be fulfilled through a job or a profession, but it's an avocation. It's the main thing that you're here for. And so if you got to do a rotten job you don't like, fine, that's what you have to do. But then put your main energy into your drive, into your passion. And if you can, get the two to align with each other. So this is the key thing about this. The mastery system is based on pursuing your gifts. This is the key thing. And working to perfect them, improve on them, because we're never perfect, but the whole effort of being a human being is to try. This is the key thing, understanding why you're here. And a lot of people will say, 50, 60 years old, they don't know why they're here. Now, sometimes that is not really true, because what they mean is they haven't identified it as a profession, as something they can say, I'm doing this, but they're doing the things they enjoy doing through their expression of their gifts. And it involves helping other people. And so as long as that happens, you know, they're on their path. There's nothing wrong with that. But the key thing is the deep plunge into your ancient African, whatever your ethnicity is, history and culture, and your African and African American history and culture. This is key in terms of you also being able to discover your life purpose, because it's within that context as an expression of that culture, but it's the way in which you use your own special gifts to pursue living your history and making history. So in the case of this mastery system, one of the things that's different about this and the identity system is, though in some ways it's similar, to really pursue the mastery system, to pursue your gifts, call for hard work. A friend of mine, Thabiti M. Tambuzi, who watches a lot of basketball and who really loved Kobe Bryant, he made the point to me once that there are a number of players that came into the, play professional basketball who had the potential of Kobe Bryant, but they were lazy. They just rode on their natural gifts. But in the case of Kobe, he worked at it. And there's a whole lot of Kobe's. Of course, there's the other side to this. Dizzy made this comment. He said, God gave some of us more gifts than others. So a bird didn't have to work too much on the saxophone, the alto saxophone. He needed to work harder on himself. He just didn't have the discipline. He got hooked on drugs and alcohol when he was very young. He tried to get off, but he couldn't stay off. He didn't have the discipline for that. So he was given the gifts that didn't require a lot of discipline to pursue, whereas Dizzy had to use a lot more. And Coltrane, who came in with very few gifts, had to use even more, 14 hours a day. You hear me? So it varies in terms of how much discipline is required, in part according to the gifts. But those who were gifted, because Kobe came in gifted, but he wanted to do better, and he was ruthless at it. He didn't play with it. And it was a key to his mastery. And I'm going to say this, that people who follow this path, they're like Magic Johnson when he came into the Lakers. His hero was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he went up to him and told him how much he respected him and blah, blah, blah. And Kareem said, good. Bring me my paper in the morning. Do this and that for me. When Miles Davis got into one of his first bands, can you imagine Miles, who was considered to be arrogant? He had to pick up the clothes from the cleaners for the other musicians. This is called apprenticeship. And you might call it flunkyism. If you want to learn from the master, show respect to the master. See, you're entering a whole different realm. You hear me? But generally, there's hard work involved on your character, on your skill set, your gifts. Some will require more attention on one than the other, but we need attention on both. Many of the youth who watch this program, the biggest obstacle that your generation has to doing this is with the choice between two cultures phenomenon that hit our community since '68, where, you know, we've had breakdowns in Black communities. One of the biggest breakdowns is the generation gap. And with the gap between the young and the old. One of the most important institutions to come from Africa to America and the Western Hemisphere was the institution of elderhood. And it's come under the most serious attacks since the mid-'80s, when they flooded our community with drugs and began to, as they knock out businesses and communities, line our youth, especially Black males, in jail. And what ends up happening is we end up with peer groups often listening more to each other than anybody else. And so peer groups are too often out of control. And so as a result, we got a lot of young people who say there's nothing any older person can tell me. Well, that is pure foolishness. One reason why COVID did so much damage in the Black community is we were listening to bunk. Now, I know some of you still don't want to hear this. You're listening to bunk. And then when you got on that respirator, which is almost a death sentence, some was still foolish enough to say they didn't have it, but a lot of them were saying, I wish I had got that shot. Wish for something you should have done? Come on. We're in a situation now where, I've said this before, whereas with elders, wisdom can be exchanged intergenerationally. When you got this disconnect, then sometimes common sense isn't common. You know what I mean? You're in bad shape when you're not using common sense. Somebody is using something that they just know is true, that bleach will actually save you, huh? Since when does bleach save you from anything other than your clothes? You know what I mean? It ain't supposed to be put inside of you. And Trump took his shots when he was telling people to take bleach. And then this head of Brazil, he claimed he took it and caught it and recommended that his people take it. And I sure hope he gets whipped, because he's another version of Trump. And don't forget, the majority of people in Brazil are Black, but I'd be saying that no matter what their color was. So an obstacle for some of the younger generation to deal with this mastery system is that some of the younger generation have been taught that these old people don't know what they're talking about. They've been taught to discard wisdom. You need to know, our people have negotiated all kinds of hell in this country with wisdom. We have generally done smart. We don't do dumb. And for some of us to now do dumb, this is a great departure from our culture. You know what I mean? But at the same time, there's an awakening among the youth. And a lot of the youth are taken up, a lot of us, as very important, as long as what they're getting makes sense, because they're discriminating. And so they see some of us as the extension of the John Henry Clarks and others. They're looking for it. I know it. That's one reason why we got this younger viewership on this show, but it's across the country. It's reflective in the fact that they were the main force behind Black Lives Matter. They're conscious. So we've got an awakened sector of this youth who've done their homework and have improved on some of our stuff, Ella Baker's stuff, group-centered leadership, and all that kind of stuff. And so they are looking to do the best they can with their lives. Almost all of us are, even the ones who are putting down elders, they are. And some elders aren't acting like elders. So let's deal with that one. You know what I mean? They're giving bad advice, acting like fools. You know what I mean? Trying to prove to people that they're younger than they are. I've been in meetings where some of these elders are going to go up and confess on the bank that they robbed when they were their age. That's what they call relating. That's called stupid. I hope the statute of limitations are over. Huh? So the connection between the sixfold stages to mental freedom and the mastery system is based on knowing your gifts or discovering them and then working to perfect them. And that is enhanced when you know who you are. Now, in my case, a major reason that I've been able to innovate on the awakening system for our people and people of color is through undergoing a lifelong awakening experience, and through apprenticing under masters, either directly or indirectly. And I want to stress that the master and the master systems that have come out of Africa and been carried to the Americas and the United States involves apprenticeship, where you're either working under a live master, or it can be indirectly under a master that you may be alive but you don't have regular contact with, or who has passed on. But the key thing is, what you're doing in either case is learning essentials to master your own gifts. So when I first began in what I now call apprenticeship, I didn't know this was an African apprenticeship system. People in certain fields of the arts would be more conscious of the fact of the importance of the apprenticeship systems, particularly in music and dance. They're conscious of that. Some are conscious that this is African-based, but most who are doing this don't know that the system that they are apprenticing under derives from Africa. Now, John Henry Clarke, who I apprenticed under for years directly, his whole knowledge base came through the apprenticeship system under masters. There's an excellent book, which I don't need because I spent a long time with him, and I've interviewed him a lot on this as well for the book I'm writing now. But for people who want an overview of this, it's a book called, from Cornell University, called My Life in Search of Africa, John Henry Clarke. And it was 2 lectures that he gave at Cornell. It was basically on the masters in his life. And John said of this apprenticeship system, it was better than Western education because you didn't have to become re-educated. Because when you go through Western education, there's a whole lot you got to throw out. But if you're coming up under masters, the best in their areas, and who are good human beings, and this is what John always said about his first master and others, Arthur Schoenberg, He spent more time talking about what a good person he was. And if you recall the conversation that I had with Dr. Theophil Obenga, he referred to his master, Sheikh Anta Diop, as being a holy person. And he's 2 years older than me, Obenga. So he's not in any romantic stage, about his master. He knows his strengths and weaknesses, but he's talking about the high quality of his character. He said it may have had to do with the Murid, the African-based Islamic movement that he was a part of, Sheikh Anta Diop. But he said he never talked negative about anybody, He was a high order human being. And so this is a part of what this mastery system is about. It's apprenticing under masters who are masters in their field, and often, not always, in the African American context, apprenticing with masters of high character. Not all African American masters have the character that they should because of the mess they've gone through in this country. And I would suppose this is true now with the interruption of the culture in colonialism in Africa today. The key thing is that the youth today can use this system when they have an appreciation for the fact that there are people who have been on this earth longer than them that have a knowledge of stuff and a mastery of stuff that's in their area of gifts and interests that they can learn from, and when they have the humility to listen and learn. And if those masters are willing to take them under their wing, because that's a whole nother thing about this apprenticeship system. And in the case of our youth are undergoing their lives during a time of power shifts. And so power is shifting away from the white world to the world of color. Europe has already gone down. America is going down. And China is rising. Africa will rise. The Caribbean is rising. And there's a demographic power shift in this country from white to black, brown, red, and yellow. And they're doing everything to push the clock back. And so for the youth, as you're perfecting your skills, your destiny, then it's got to be a part of pushing back so that you're not serving those in this society who have been dishing out oppression, but you are changing the conditions in this society, changing the structure of this society, and playing a leading role rather than a following role. So the mastery system carried from Africa to the Americas, including the United States, covers all domains of life. This is a system, unlike Western education, I've stressed this before, that is based on the principle that knowing occurs through being what you know, or to know the truth, you have to be the truth. And as a result, this leads to a totality of knowing that comes from being what is known, meaning the transformation that occurs in an apprenticeship system is mind, body, and spirit. And this is different from what happens in Western education. That includes Afrocentric education if they're using the Western method. It only affects the mind. So in my apprenticeship, as I was undergoing awakening, I then wanted to be the best in the areas in which my gifts would lead me to pursue. I wanted to be the best organizer, and I wanted to be the best scholar. I had no idea of teaching or writing books or anything. I just knew that was an area of interest, and I wanted to improve on it. And so my first master, I've said this before, was Marcus Garvey. And of course, this was an indirect apprenticeship. He had died a year after I was born, 1940. I was born 1939. So obviously, I never met him. But I picked him because in the mastery system, the masters that you pick should master your gifts, your qualities. They may not be just like you. They may have a lot of interests that aren't the same as yours, but in certain key areas, they need to match your interests. And so if you're an artist, then you should be looking for masters who match that. You know what I mean? And so in my particular case, I'm looking for, and this was unconscious. I wasn't just consciously saying, oh, I need a master who matches my interest in organizing. It was a natural inclination to be drawn to that, you know? And so when we discovered Marcus Garvey in 1963, some knew about him before, but most of us didn't. He had been written out of the history books. Then I realized that this is the best organizer produced in the Western Hemisphere in the 20th century, possibly in the world. He had the largest movement and on a lot of different levels. And I'm leading what becomes the only successful Black freedom movement in the North in the 60s to now. And so I'm inclined towards wanting to be the best. And Garvey could do certain things we didn't do in the movement, build institutions, particularly economic institutions. And so I wanted to learn how to do that. And then he was on the path of African consciousness, as I was. So he provided some models for that as a leader. So he became my first master. And that's at the fundamental level. And I spent a number of years working on certain skill sets that I learned from him, getting books on him. I told you before, when I was in Harlem, paid $100 for a 2-volume set on Marcus Garvey. You could buy a Victorian, 5,800 square foot Victorian for $36,000. I know because I bought one for our organization. I put the down payment on it and then they paid it off, though my wife and I paid the biggest part of the payments. So that was a lot of money, but I didn't care what the money was. I wanted to get into Garvey, know his stuff, you know? So that was my first apprenticeship, to try and perfect my skill as an organizer. And then my second master was El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. Again, I wasn't consciously saying, oh, I want him for the 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons. But I was inclined towards him. Why? One of the 2 best organizers in the 60s, A. And B, a person with a brilliant mind who was studious, who was constantly studying. He was a scholar. And so he stood on the shoulders of Garvey. His family had been Garveyite. And so I'm drawing from another side that I need for my own development, which is the scholarly side. But it's a warrior scholarly side. And then Malcolm was a revolutionary. And I was in the process of becoming one. And I wasn't conscious of this. This was unconscious at the time. Malcolm was very much like my father. They were both, you ain't into astrology, but they were both in the same solar lunar cycle. My father was an Aquarius, Malcolm was a Taurus, but they were in the last phase of the moon. That's the revolutionary cycle of the moon. Not everybody in this cycle is revolutionary, because the moon has gone through all phases. This is the end before a new moon. People born in this phase, Lenin was born in this phase. Garvey, by the way, was also born in this phase. Malcolm was born in this phase. My father was. And so it's the end of one cycle, the beginning of the other. It's almost the beginning of the other. And so people in this stage, if they're highly evolved, they're prophetic. Malcolm was prophetic. Garvey was prophetic. Garvey predicted that the Japanese would rise up against the West. This was after World War I, and engage in World War II, and predicted that this would provide the basis for freeing up Africa. And Malcolm had all kinds of predictions about, he would say that this generation knew what it wanted, the next generation would know how to get it. Now, he was right on the first. The second, the external forces and the choice between two cultures took the next generation out. But that prophecy is coming through and true now, you know, that a lot of the young are beginning to see how to get it and what they want. My father was prophetic. He predicted Hitler's defeat when he went into Russia. He was, and like Malcolm, he was a fighter. The difference with my father was he was an individual warrior. There was no movement to join in his time. So his fists were his weapons and his mouth, because he would always warn an opponent. Not always. There were times where the insult went down, you got knocked out. You know, the N-word, whatever. My father's light complexion, so they sometimes didn't know he was black. And when he woke up, he said, "I'm one of them, buddy." And when he took on an opponent too big, because my father wasn't that tall, too big to beat in a fair fight, he had brass knuckles. And when he clipped you with those brass knuckles, you were out. And he hit him after that. So you think he had that strength. You'd run after that, jaw broken, everything else. Oh, and my father, the grim reaper. So I was drawn to Malcolm in part because he was like my father. I wasn't conscious of it. Later, I became conscious of it. So my ability to innovate, and by the way, innovation in any area is the 2% category. In any field, innovators are only 2%. If you're a scholar, 2% of the scholars are innovators. If you're an athlete, only 2%. If you're a scientist, only 2%. And that's because the innovator comes up with new schools. And the best innovation comes when God reveals stuff to you. Two of my best innovations have come through piping into God's mind. I've talked about this before. The twin lineal model and the choice between two cultures, that came from God's mind. You are discovering either a truth about your history or something that's there but never seen before, and it's real key, or in the choice between two cultures, you are getting a summary of what's affected our people and a way to get out of it. A choice between two cultures. A choice between this mad Euro-American culture or mad European culture and African or African-American culture. And so it's telling you that a lot of shifts and craziness you see in the Black community is the result of that, but it is also the problem is telling you the solution. And that's how God's mind works. So when you get into that, it's like taking an exam and cheating. You got the answers, but it's more than that. You're not cheating. You've got the whole answer. How much of it you get, how much of it I get, depends on how much I grow into these truths, because God's mind is whole. So on the twin lineal path, I'm just telling you, I'm getting ready to write another book. I've discovered something else. Oh, this is so key. I've been up reading longer than I usually read because I'm doing research on this that confirms this. You know what I mean? Because when God gives you an answer, there's so many parts to it. Your mind's only going to capture what your consciousness is, you know, enables you to. So this is the nature of innovation. So discovering the sixfold stages of mental freedom, that comes through going through it, you know, practicing it. And through making comparisons, both in African and African American culture, making comparisons between the two cultures, African and African American, because as we're delving into the culture, one is an extension of the other. African American culture is an extension of African culture with other influences. So when you begin to see the connections, that's where the real power comes. That's where the real growth comes from. And the connections are profound. But if you're taught to believe that you lost it all in Africa, you won't even bother to study it. You know what I mean? So this is real key in this system. Now, the innovation, one of the innovations that's key to the book on Seba is this mastering the master system. To fully understand it, you're going to have to read the book. But I'll go into part of it today. And this is the Dogon African American Mastery System. Now, I did not really fully understand the Dogon African Mastery System until I came to understand the basis for the African American one. And then I could better understand what I was going through, because I was apprenticing in the Dogon system indirectly under the master Oba T'Shaka, who was a master of Boloso, the third word. We'll go into this in a minute. And I spent a good 30 years in that system, transforming my philosophy, my thought pattern, my attitude pattern, my behavior pattern. But I could only really explain how this worked when I discovered how the African American system worked. So this is what you miss if you don't study both, you know? So John Henry Clarke, like many other masters, had studied under masters. And when my book on the Mother Principle came out, I brought it to him because he wrote the introduction to the book. I wanted to deliver it to him. It was in 1995. The only time I'd been in his house, and was in his library, had 25,000 books all packed in there and stuff. And then I explained this next book. And when I explained to him, he said, "How are you going to explain something so complex like that?" I didn't give an answer then, but I think he got it before he passed on, because for 8 months, the last 8 months of his life, I interviewed him on the masters in his life. And the last interview, I pointed this out before, was in his wife's apartment in Harlem after a ASCAT, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization meeting, where I discovered that Obenga was looking for a job. And that's when I recommended to Wade Nobles, who was chairing Black Studies, that we hire him. I was chairing the hiring committee, and we brought him in. And so for the last 8 months of his life, I was interviewing John Henry Clarke on the masters in his life. And there's some masters you've never heard about. And my last interview was on his, what he called his mature period. John Henry Clarke didn't use the terms that are normally used in either the African or the African American apprenticeship system to describe his development. He called one stage, which I'll get in towards the end of this, his formative period, because John had a great high view of himself, as he should have. And then the developed stage he called his mature period. So when I was interviewing him, I'd use his words, you know. John did not know that the apprenticeship system that he underwent under masters was African-based. He didn't know it, and he didn't know what the African system was, but he was living it. And so he's one of the 6 masters that I have in the book on Seba that will be coming out soon. I've finished 643 pages. I haven't been writing for a while. By the way, one reason is I got stuck on Amilcar Cabral. I'm working right now on his mature period, as John Henry Clarke would call it, and it was missing something. So one of the viewers to this show had a list of books up and one was on Amilcar Cabral. This book right here, The Life of a Reluctant Nationalist. And I picked it up and it answered the question. So I can get back to writing on that. So see, I'm learning from some of y'all. You know what I mean? John Henry Clarke is a model of this system. And he's one of the best scholars that we've produced. And he mastered masters and became a master in his own right. So how did I discover the connection between the Dogon and African American mastery system? And this is a major breakthrough. This is an innovative breakthrough, because when you understand the connection, then you have a better understanding of the working, particularly of the system we have here, by understanding how it grew out of an older system. And by the way, while I'm dealing with the connection between the Dogon and African American mastery systems, just about all the ancient African mastery systems are the same. They have different words to describe this. When I explain this to my Babalawo, Ifeyemi, who's an Araba, second highest office in the Dogon in the Yoruba priesthood, he said, well, we have the same thing, meaning it was very similar, same kind of apprenticeship system. But I'm using the Dogon because this is the one that I came up under that was African-based, and I picked the Dogon because they had not been, at that point, infected by Christianity or Islam. In fact, they had retreated to the Bangaderia cliffs to avoid conversion to Islam. And so it was a pure system. And then it's profound. It's based on astrophysics, which I didn't know when I first got into it, because the first 3 degrees of knowledge don't touch on astrophysics. It's the 4th degree that really touches on it. Even though the whole system's based on it, you're not talking about any planetary stuff until you get to the 4th degree of knowledge. So I spent 30 years in this Dogon system, reorganizing my mind, and then getting into African American mastery systems at the same time, but not fully understanding the operative principles of the African American system. And when I understood the operative principles of the African American mastery system, then I better understood what I was going through in the Dogon system. See? So one of the weaknesses of our scholars is that the Afrocentric ones tend to focus just on Africa. The African American ones just tend to focus on African American history. What we need is a balance of the two. And that's true also for the disciplines of so-called Black studies, Africana studies, or anything you're dealing with in independent Black education or any kind of education you're doing. You got to deal with both. And in the case of Africa, it's dealing with your past reality and your present, and then seeing how you deal with that. We have a brother here, Africa Kekume. He's coming from Azania, South Africa. Welcome, brother. And Hire Hecker. Glad to have you. You're on almost all the time. In Bola Jar 1. Right on, brother. Or sister. Whichever your sex is there, I'm not sure. So, how did I come up with the conclusion that these are the same? Big breakthrough, because this leads to all kinds of stuff. And by the way, here's another thing. Get this one straight. Blacks in this country have a real bad case of getting down on themselves. And this Willie Lynch stuff, we lost our culture in slavery, and then those who don't say it are still saying it. Everything you know comes from white people and blah, 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 blah. When your mother told you that human beings come before money, did that come from white people? When your mother told you and your father told you the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, did that come from white people? Huh? When your parents told you to do right above and beyond everything else, did that come from white people? Huh? When they said, as my mother said, my children came through me, but they're children of the world. Did that come from white people? I don't even think that came from black people. That came from God. That's acknowledging the truth of being human, you know? Hmm. But here's the big deal. Think about this one. Oh, if you lost all your culture, explain this to me. Explain how it is. This is true for Africans all over the planet, but I'm talking to this African in America who seems to have a I lost everything complex. Explain how it is that you kept the highest system of mastery on the planet Earth, other than Africa or the Caribbean or America or wherever African people are. Huh? Explain that to me. No George Washington Carver without this mastery system. I don't care what field you're talking about. This is the source of this. Hear me? That means you have your own method for creating masters. That's why when we compete, we always win. Why? Higher system, brothers and sisters, that you're claiming you don't have. So how did I come up with this thing? Well, I'm writing the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And this is before 1995, before the book is finished. And so to rest my mind after I'm writing, because I usually don't write past 12 or 1, that's when the creative juices flow. They come in the morning, the spirits talk to you and get up and write. And so to rest my mind, I'm reading a book on jazz. By the way, it took 15 disciplines to write this book, The Mother Principle, you know? And so I'm reading this book on jazz called Thinking in Jazz. And this is a real complex book on the complexities of jazz. And this is the highest expression of the art form of Africans in America. And by the way, I should say this. This art form has been weakened by the fact that too many young musicians are learning their music exclusively through music schools, Juilliard and others, you know? And while these music schools have some technical things to teach, and in some cases, black masters are teaching, in most cases it's whites, but in some cases it's blacks, their music too often has become mechanical. Why? Because they haven't been apprenticing under masters. And it's when you're apprenticing under masters that you have a mind, body, spirit experience, because you're dealing with the whole lesson, the life lesson, the teachings of the masters. And very often, like Monk, when Monk was teaching apprentices under him, John Coltrane and others, sometimes he wouldn't have anything to say. He'd just get on the piano and start playing. Sometimes he'd talk about something that had nothing to do with the subject of music, but it was being around him and then learning the fine points, both of character and of mastery. Of him, John Coltrane said, apprenticing under Monk, what was most important was the little things, how he put all these little things together. Well, of course, that would impress him because that's what he was doing. You know what I mean? So when you take a music, an art form, or you take some other area of mastery, which is taught by masters, and then now it could be taught by just about anybody. The teachers may not be masters, and it's a classroom. So, you know, you got a class for 2 hours, an hour and 45 minutes, and you go take another class and you take an exam. Apprenticeship is lifelong. You hear me? It's total. This is not total. So the mechanical sound that's coming from some of the musicians, some of the younger musicians, is coming from the fact that the system is not being transmitted through the mastery system of master to novice from mouth to ear. And by the way, in the African American system, there's a high respect for the oral tradition, even though if you're talking about music, most of the musicians can read music. Head music is what they prefer because you're coming out of an oral culture. And so, the older bands, they could have 100 pieces of music. It was all in the heads of the players. You know what I mean? And then it's created on the spot. But that's a standard that's generally practiced throughout the art form. And then there's a kind of interaction that you're lacking, like with John Henry Clarke, my apprenticeship under him. I'd call him because I'd call him twice a week or so, talk to him for a couple hours on this book I'm working on. And then we just have conversations. We spoke together. I spoke in his last speech delivered outside this country was in London. Me and my first wife spoke with him. We were on the same platform. And he and I shared the platform in Chicago on Malcolm X. I wrote a book on Malcolm. He edited a book with a chapter that he wrote on Malcolm and was very kind to let me go through his, garage to look at any materials he had on Malcolm, and would constantly share insights. So when I'm having insights, I'm calling him and saying, like when I went to Ghana after I had the vision on the Just Society, 1990, and I'm in the villages in Ghana and watching how they worked and everything else. And I call him to tell him my conclusions. And in one word, he summarized what I thought was so profound. He said, yes, because we're talking about the Asante people. What's great about them is their consistency. I was telling him how the lineage system, the opinion, who is the lineage head, behaves and plays the same role as the Asante Hina, who's the king, and the Asante Wa, the queen mother. First among equals, but it's the consensus of the lineage that rules. And the same thing with the king, the Asante Hina, Asante Wa. It's the consensus of the council that rules, not the individual. And it's, in fact, lineage heads that make up the king's council, the ones who never lied and cheated, and the fearless ones in battle and so forth, didn't abuse women and so forth. Kind of leaders you need today, incorruptible. You know what I mean? So this interaction is something that's invaluable. And with John, I'd say of him, the same thing that John said of his masters. What I was impressed most about John was his kindness and his niceness. He was a Southern Black gentleman. He always had a suit and tie on. He had his fingernails, done. He tended to those. He was a Capricorn. There's a certain thing about Capricorns in terms of being neat, but you don't have to be a Capricorn to have your, a pedicure or a manicure in this case, a manicure. John was very attentive to appearance, even though he's blind. You know what I mean? That was John. But he tipped his hat. He's walking down the street. Never heard him curse, but was always kind. You know what I mean? So this kind of interaction, this is what also helps shape you. It makes you want to be more like that. It's not just about being the best in your field, because the best about being the best is being your best. You may or may not be the best in a field. The question is, are you your best? That's the question. That's the real question. So how did I come up with this connection? So I'm reading this book, Thinking in Jazz, and there's this great jazz musician. His name is Walter Bishop. And Walter Bishop was a jazz pianist. He had played with Milt Jackson, Stan Getz, Charlie Parker, Oscar Pettiford, and Miles Davis. He was born in the 1920s. All these people he apprenticed under were masters, and then he formed his own band and became a master himself, going through this apprenticeship system. He also studied at Juilliard but that was secondary to his apprenticeship. And then he taught music theory at colleges and universities. You know? So I'm going to the chapter where he has a quote that introduces the chapter. And usually profound things are very simple. You know, they're only simple because people have worked them out. You know what I mean? And in this particular case, he was describing the system for producing masters, or the transformational path of masters that comes through the African American system. This path describes the path of not only jazz musicians, but of leaders, of scholars, of athletes, of comedians. I don't care what field it is. You know what I mean? It follows the same path. And so I read this passage, and he's describing the path of mastery in jazz, but it's the path that's followed in all systems. He said this. Listen to this. First, it goes from imitation, then it goes to assimilation, then it goes to innovation. By assimilation, he meant improvisation, because I know you all are going to jump up and say, oh, assimilation, what are you talking about? No, he's describing the method for which a musician becomes an improviser, but that is also the method. It ain't about assimilating racially. It's about bringing together different sounds. You know what I mean? But that's also the same method that we call improvisation that we use in all fields of mastery. So let me repeat what he said. The path of mastery goes from imitation to assimilation to innovation, which is assimilation, improvisation. 3 stages. Now, when I read this, I instantly knew that's the same as the Dogon system. The same path. You hear me? And it helped me to understand what I had been going through. You understand? And this path was describing the African American mastery path that is a part of our day-to-day culture of mastery in different areas of life. And so I could understand the pattern to the Dogon system better when I could see it through my own cultural eyes and see what it was, which I was going through, but I didn't understand how you describe the stages. I was going through them, but I didn't have the explanation for the sequences of this. And this same system that you find in Africa, which has this great cultural unity, was brought from Africa to the Americas, to the Caribbean, to the United States. Now, different cultures place a greater emphasis on certain points. I'll get into that in a minute, depending on their ethos. But my wife, who's from the Caribbean, makes the point that basically the building of the Caribbean was based on this apprenticeship system. Whether it's the people who build a house or whatever area of life, you're dealing with, this was the basis. And it was here too, except that we didn't have the 40 acres and a mule where we could just run off and build all our stuff. It was harder in that sense here. Now, when I discovered this mastery path, I have this habit when I'm doing any kind of work, breakthrough work, then I usually consult with somebody who has expertise in that area to bounce things off of them. And so in this particular case, this started a process of me sharing stuff with Dr. Asa Hilliard, who was a good friend as I pointed out before, played a big role in me getting tenured at San Francisco State when he was Dean of Education, the College of Education, the only Black dean on campus. He served on my hiring and retention committee. This is the committee that comes up with a recommendation on you being put on tenure track. Tenure track is usually a 6-year process. You're reviewed. If you're approved, then you have a lifetime appointment. That's called tenure. So the FBI had targeted me before to deny me a teaching credential, tried to kill me 3 times. And so this time they were trying to carry out that COINTELPRO counterintelligence program operation of denying you a livelihood. In this particular case, one objective of COINTELPRO, I pointed this out in some shows before, was to see that no militants got to teach the youth, to create a break between the young and the old. You understand? And so Asa was out there punching for me, giving me some support. In fact, I used the book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X, as a book. You didn't need a book. I had enough in my file to tenure 3 or 4 people. You know what I mean? And when he read it, he was so kind. Asa. I didn't apprentice under Asa, but he was my friend. He was so kind that he said, me and my brother will pay to publish this book. Pay. I didn't accept that, but I appreciated that. That was the nature of Asa. And then when he had helped me win a victory, he brings me into his office and he says, Shaka. I said, what? Because I'm a fighter. And I had all kinds of stuff I was throwing at them, and he was giving me a lot of support. He said, you won. That was good news. It was good news because you can overfight. So, that was Asa. So I called Asa to share this with him. Why did I call him? He comes from a family of educators. He passed. He came, by the way, died in Egypt, came from a family of educators, school teachers, principals, all this kind of stuff. He had a PhD in educational psychology. He was a cusp person. This is again astrology. In between Leo and Virgo. You go into his office when he was Dean of Education at San Francisco State, he had all these lions. He identified with the Leo part. He was married to a Leo wife who was mayor outside of a city outside of Atlanta. And Asa said he had to get permission to come into the city when he was coming in. That was his wife. She's still alive, a beautiful sister, held office when they lived here in East Palo Alto, a Black city that Blacks organized at that time. So I'm calling Asa to share this information. He's not in. This is how Black scholars and Black people generally interact, because also this whole system's informal. In this case, we're friends. So he's not in. So a couple of days later, I'm on the toilet and I get a call from Asa. This is how we communicate. And I'm saying, because I'm really excited. And I'm saying, Asa, guess what? He said, what? I said, the Dogon system of mastery is the same as the African American. And then I laid it out, which I'm going to explain in a minute, briefly. And I said, man, do you know what this means? He said, man, this is one of the greatest breakthroughs in education you can make. This is something. So for 25 years, I've been working on this book that's explaining this. This ain't the whole part of the book, because there's another part on Seba, which is how you teach. This is the mastery system. And then the one on the 6-fold stages to mental freedom that frees your mind from, mental slavery when it comes to historical, cultural, political indoctrination. So this is the point. These two systems are the same. Now, how are they the same? They are the same, and they have the same transformational path. In other words, those 3 things that I described by Walter Bishop, imitation, improvisation, innovation, are found in the Dogon system. That's the center for their system and all other systems. However, so that is where they're the same. They're also the same because they're an apprenticeship system. They're also the same because these levels, in this case, stages in the African American, and you'll see degrees in the Dogon system, mark stages of human growth and development. And here's another thing to get straight. The African system and the African American system is a total system, mind, body, and spirit. In part because when you're apprenticing under a human being, then you are drawing a totality of things from that person, the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. That's part of the reason. The European system, and this is Euro-American as well, is only able to teach to one domain, and that's the domain of the mind. It is not able to teach to the body or the spirit. The leading textbook on pedagogy, which Dr. Asa Hilliard recommended that I read, that's given to people who are going through teaching programs in the US and other programs where they teach, is a book called Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. The editor of the book is a psychologist named Bloom. Just about every person who's going to be a teacher is told they have to read this book. And this was a meeting of white psychologists at the end of World War II. And what do they say about their system of education? They do not know how to teach to the body. They only know how to teach to the mind, and they have excluded the spirit because for them, that's a superstitious category. It's not real. And so for them, it's emotion. Emotion. So they don't know how. And even though they have masters that have come out, like an Einstein, Einstein's method for breakthrough didn't come through their system. It came from the realm of the spirit. Spirit, baby. And he understood that mastery depended upon his logical mind being subordinate to his higher mind. He understood that because he had had this experience, this intuitive experience, where in a dream, he's on a sled going faster than light. And that's where the theory of relativity of time comes from. But their systems don't know how to reproduce this. But this system is one of the systems, the Seba system, which I've also come up with a way that replaces the Western system of miseducation. African-centered scholars are teaching African information with the European method for teaching it. And so they're doing the same thing that the European does, give them facts and you remember them, basically dropping information on people and they feed it back. And they think they're doing something, they're getting people to critically think, but they're not really developing the creative juices of that person because they don't have the holistic system. This one, Seba, is the method for teaching. And I replaced that. That's an innovation. The book that I'm finishing, it's dealing with that. Because as Dr. Obenga said, we got a problem if we have African-centered methods, African-centered knowledge and European methods. And when your enemy sees that you are operating off his training, you can say some stuff that is something he don't particularly like, but he likes it because he understands he's got you under control. You're under his system. And we're in the battle on African-centered education, and Arthur Schlesinger was attacking the African-centered educational movement. through this book right here, Disuniting of America. And that was a movement I was leading through the National Black United Front. I've covered this in another show. He approved of certain Black scholars who they think are doing African-centered stuff. They're writing certain books. I'm not going to say what they are because it would identify the scholar. I'm not attacking. This ain't a personal conversation here or a personal attack. But all they're doing is regurgitating facts. Nixon said there are no truths, there are only facts. Now, facts are important. COVID, there's some facts on that. You should study it. So don't think I'm saying that facts are unimportant, but there's a thing called truth. And what happens with truth is when you got the truth, facts fall in line. You hear me? Facts fall in line. And so this apprenticeship system, this mastery system in particular, is one that is holistic. The seventh system that I've innovated, you'll see it when it comes out. The book, I won't be talking about it on this show until it comes out. It replaces their system. It frees you, because my whole objective is for people to be able to draw on their own inner powers and to use it. That's the whole purpose of this show. I ain't putting money into this show and making no money because it's in my interest. This ain't no ego trip for me. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to do is share stuff with people to encourage you to draw on your own inner powers, to be the powerful person you can be for the cause of justice and for the cause of truth. And if you're in South Africa, to take that system as crooked as a pretzel and straighten it out. If you're in America, to take this crooked system and straighten it out. If you're in the Caribbean, do the same thing. South America, I don't care where you are. And if you aren't Black, do the same thing with your people. You hear me? Huh? That's my motive, pure and simple. And check it out. I can't have any other. What else am I getting out of this? I'm enjoying this, but I'm enjoying it to the extent that you can use it. And the best use for me is people that take this into their communities and use it in the empowerment process. And for some of you that are engaged in struggle, let me know. When you have these comments, either on the chat, but especially underneath the show, you know, where people go to the screen and people make comments on that. I'm in this group, blah, blah. We're doing this and that because I like to hook up. That's part of what this show also wants to engage in, because change is going to occur through collective power, wherever you are in the world, you know. So Western systems have that limitation. And please believe me, the scholars who are teaching African-centered information, but are using a Eurocentric methodology, their biggest weakness usually is that they're afraid of the spirit. And they do everything to avoid it because that's been their miseducation. And so they regard it as superstitious. And when you start talking to them about, because I interact with these scholars, and you start talking to them about this, they back up in their chair, they get nervous. They'll tell you they're not into that. Some of them coming out of a straight Holy Ghost experience. Huh? What they don't know is they are denying themselves the experience of the higher mind. You hear me? And so they can be very good at data collection and writing books full of facts, but very little in the way of insight. So that's another side of this. So what are the agreements between Dogon and African American mastery systems? What are their agreements? Now I'm only hitting the top here, but I'm going to give you a few to give you the idea of the agreements. As I pointed out, the African American mastery system applies to all domains of knowledge, whatever, has 3 stages. The Dogon system of mastery has 4 degrees of knowledge. The first degree of knowledge in the Dogon system is Jiriso, G-I-R-I, 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 so, S-O, Jiriso. Jiriso means the word in front of you. That's symbolic. African systems are all symbolic. That symbolizes simple. You can see it. It's right in front of you. Can't you? You know, your mother's up here. Jiriso, baby. That finger in your face. Did you get that point, boy? I told you. But no, this is philosophy. I'm joking here. Jiriso is simple knowledge. Forward knowledge. It's the fundamental knowledge. It's like in a building, it's a part of the foundation. Now, the thing is, it ain't really simple. And the older you are when you learn it, the harder it is. Because here's the deal. If you get a child, and they're exposed to languages, they'll learn them right away. But if you get to be 20, it's going to take some time to learn it. Because the child is at a certain stage where they're open to things. It's a part of the stage of human growth and development. They're open. So it's the same thing. Jiriso for somebody who's 20, I got into mine when I was about 23, 24, started getting into it. It's harder because you're, grown up enough that you're going to have to really work on it, But it's still simple knowledge in front of you. So that's the first degree of knowledge. The second degree of knowledge is Beniso, B-E-N-N-E, 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 Beniso, meaning sideward. It's peripheral knowledge. It's knowledge that you can see from the side there, the corner of your eye. This means it's not exactly hidden, but it's not as obvious as a knowledge that's in the front. It's a little harder to get. You hear me? Beniso. Then there's Boloso. Boloso, I'm going to spell this because you'll get it wrong, means backward. B-A-C-K-W-O-R-D, not W-A-R-D, backward. Because in the Dogon system and African systems in general, all knowledge is conveyed through words. Nomo in the Dogon system, N-O-M-M-O or N-U-M-M-O, conveyed by spirits. Nomos are generally spirits of God that rule different areas of nature, the way netters do in Kemet, or rishas do in the Yoruba system. They rule different principles of nature or whatever. And so the knowledge, Boloso, is the hidden knowledge. It's the word in the back word, the word behind you. This means more difficult. It's hidden. You're going to have to dig to get it. And then the highest level of knowledge is Sodaya, S-O. D-A-Y-I-S-O, D-A-Y-I-S-O, D-A-Y-I. That means clear word. Now, this is really important. This is really important because clear word, it suggests a whole lot of things. On one level, it suggests a word free of imperfection, clear word, What it means in the Dogon system is the master who's at this level, because there'll be masters at Jiriso, Beniso, Boloso, Sodaya. That is people who are apprenticing. No master is going to be at Jiriso or Beniso, but the people who are apprenticing can be at any one of these levels. But what Sodaya means ultimately is the mastery of the clear word in all of its ordered complexity. So it can mean some Dogon masters, Hogons are the masters, Hogon. If you saw the leaflet advertising this show, they're astrophysicists, but they're astrophysicists in a spirit sense. They live this. You hear me? Truly wise. There are some, a very few, that master all domains of knowledge, very few. And then there are others that master specific domains of knowledge. So the apprenticeship system in the Dogon system is a self-discovery system where novices in the beginning are apprenticing under Hogons or masters, and they're going through transformation. And in apprenticeship systems, you don't have classes where somebody's on the blackboard saying, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, this is a life experience, and it's an experience of discovery. The Dogon masters, the Hogons, they're not telling students certain truths. They have to uncover them, discover them. And that's pretty much the way their system is set up. The system, as I went through it, it was a discovery process because they would convey their truths through a dunoso, Adunoso, Adunoso, which are signs of the universe. And in the case of the Jiriso, Beniso, Boloso system, in that system, you have symbolic beings that are moving and they represent many truths. You have to discover them. And it's in the process of discovering them that you internalize them. It's a whole different system of learning. I saw one person up here who's taken my class on this. That had been a long time ago. That's the only class I taught without teaching. You don't teach that. You have to discover that. That's real teaching. Life is the great teacher. I ain't nobody sitting up telling you, here's the steps to courting a woman. Here's the formula for having a good family. Oh, you got lessons from observation of how your family worked, of lessons that people share, blah, blah, mistakes that you made. But this system, in the Dogon system, the classroom is the village. As Nathan Hare said in Black Studies, the community is the classroom. And that's what happens in the apprenticeship system in general. So this is the meaning of these 4 degrees in the Dogon system. And I've just implied something, that while the essence of these 2 systems are the same, the transformational path is the same. You're going to see in a minute. The stages of human growth and development, they're identifying stages of human growth and development, which Western systems don't understand. And that this is conveyed through apprenticeship, direct or indirect. And their mind, body, spirit system. So these are all the same. But what's different is that the Dogon, their system's based on astrophysics. Ours isn't. Benjamin Banneker, his father was probably Dogon, Banneker. Benjamin Banneker knew about Sirius B. I mean, he was living during the time of Thomas Jefferson. He put together a better almanac than Jefferson did. So he knew about it, but ours is not, the African American, is not an astrophysics system. Theirs is, because that's the nature of what they specialize in. Their system is conveyed through a dunoso. They're an oral people, so their symbols that you learn through are signs drawn in the sand. But they convey knowledge of the universe. Both systems, though, when they work right, are designed to put you in harmony with the cosmos. So there's some different methods. Our ethos is not the same as theirs because of our historical circumstance, but it's the same system that's carrying us through it. Ours is creativity. And so you're going to see the emphasis on ours. You'll see, what the emphasis is on this mastery system. So how does Jiriso, Beniso, Bolaso, and Sodaya compare to the African American system of imitation, improvisation, and innovation? The first 2 degrees in Dogon systems of Jiriso and Beniso, which are the fundamental systems of knowledge and mastery, and knowledge in a total sense, not in this Western sense, mind, body, and spirit, because you have to undergo the transformations, and this takes time. This is the introductory phase in the system and of knowledge. It's a foundational system. It's the foundation of the house. And in this case, your spiritual house. So how does this compare to the African American system? This way. And I knew it because I'd gone through both of them without knowing the sequence until it was explained to me. The way you learn Jiriso and Beniso in the Dogon system is the same way you learn the first degree of knowledge or stage of knowledge in the African American system. And that's by imitating it, by being it, by knowing it through being it, by imitating it. And that's why I said a child will get this a lot easier than a grown person, because up to around 10 years of age, that child reflects like the moon. The mother's like the moon. So they reflect. And so they're imitating, they're learning. And that's high wisdom. And a lot of stuff, they don't know what it means until later. So it's a first stage of human growth and development. So what's the same about this? Jiriso and Beniso, the foundational principles are learned the same way that the foundational principles in the African American system are learned, through imitation. And until you get through these first 2 degrees in the Dogon in this imitative stage in the African American, you're not fit to go any further, because you have to master the fundamentals of that. If you're a boxer, then you have to master the fundamentals of boxing. If you're a martial artist, the fundamentals of martial arts. If you're a mathematician, the fundamentals of mathematics. If you're a scientist, whatever field, physics, whatever, the fundamentals of that. A musician, the fundamentals of that. And whatever you're able to do beyond that is dependent upon how thorough you are in the mastery of the fundamentals. This is the key. This is the real key. And it takes a while to get these fundamentals down. I don't care what the field happens to be. And you're going to do it best under masters. So that's the first way in which they're the same, right? So Jiriso and Beniso, foundation, and that takes years. You're in it for years. John Coltrane was in this foundational. He's one of the masters I study in this book on 7. He was in the imitation stage for years because he had average talent. I've talked about this before. He had to do a lot of practice and then a lot of work. And it was both spiritual, physical, and mental with him before he had his musical foundation down. Okay. So that's Jiriso and Beniso are learned the same way, through imitation. Not similar, the same. Now, The third degree in the Dogon system is boloso. What does boloso mean? It means synthesis. 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 Bringing things together. That's why the jazz musician Walter Bishop called it assimilation, because that means bringing things together, not that political thing you're associated with. That it wasn't on his mind. It's assimilating, bringing together different sounds, different techniques, different methods, and so forth in music. The same thing with anything else. When I had the discussion with Obenga a year or so ago, I was explaining the way in which he apprenticed under Sheikh Anta Diop. And I was talking about how he learned archaeology, paleontology, anthropology, history, philosophy, linguistics to Master Diop. What was he doing? He was bringing together different things to work out a synthesis, because he wanted to master Diop. Diop did not want tutelage. He did not want an imitator. He wanted someone who could think for themselves, who had a variety of skills. And in so doing it, coming up under the master of Sheikh Anta Diop, he was developing the foundations for his own original approach. So synthesis in boloso is bringing together these different strands in whatever field you're in, and the different elements inside your own character, your different strengths and weaknesses, and working on the weaknesses and so forth, to come up with what in African American culture is called improvisation, or your own original sound. In other words, imitation, you're just learning, if you're a musician, the different notes and everything else, and then how to put them together. And you're usually playing just like someone else played. You're imitating. But then when you get to this point of boloso, or synthesis, or the African American system, improvisation, you're bringing together different sounds, different notes under a particular school in music, bebop or hard bop or whatever. In scholarship, it could be a particular scholar. For Benga, it was Sheikh Anta Diop. But then you're adding something of your own. And that's what improvisation is, and that's what synthesis is. It's the same thing. Y'all get that? Now, because the ethos of the African American is creativity. And by the way, you ain't hearing too many people say that's their ethos, huh? Because we don't study us enough to really be clear on that. Because our ethos is improvisation or creativity, therefore improvisation gets a special emphasis in the African American mastery system. Whereas the Dogon system is very much based on tradition. It's not so much about you coming up with a unique voice, but it is about you synthesizing and coming up with whole truths at this particular stage of boloso. So boloso and improvisation, same thing, come together the same way. Synthesis, blending. You hear me? You can't be a good musician until you can blend different notes. You can't be a good athlete until you can get it all together. You know? You can't be a good scientist or anything else until you do. Huh? Uh-oh. For all those who say what we don't have, guess what you got? Huh? Uh-oh. So, the third degree of the fourth degree in the Dogon system is Sodaya. And Sodaya, as I pointed out before, is the clear word. And it's the mastery of a system and its ordered complexity. And it's interesting that these masters are priests, and so they're pure vessels. What that means is generally they're free of fault, free of wrongdoing. And so they're vessels for this higher truth. Dogon, Hogans, or Bambara masters or other traditional masters have to give up their office when they lie because they're pure vessels. They're vessels for the truth. They not only think God's thoughts, they are open constantly to these higher forces. So that's the Dogon system. That's their highest stage. It's the highest stage of wisdom, the highest stage of truth, but it's not the highest stage of talking it, it's knowing it and being it, talking it and walking it. That's the totality. And wisdom comes from the truth. And so being the truth is really the basis for the knowing. In the European system, it is simply knowing is repeating. And you can be whatever you want to be. You can say one thing and do another, you know. So in the African American system, this is innovation. And innovation is the realm because in the African American system, the emphasis is on creativity of discovering new schools of thought. But it is the highest realm of wisdom as it is in the Dogon system. And so it's the 2% in any field that come up with new schools of thought, whatever it is, Einstein in quantum physics, George Washington Carver in so many areas you can't count them. Because he was a pure vessel for God. He would get in that research laboratory at 4 a.m. and he said, do creative science. The same way Coltrane did his, he did his. Coltrane had a dream from God. George Washington Carver was getting them all the time and talking to plants and talking to animals and whatever. You know what I mean? Huh? Innovator beyond innovators. That's why you constantly hear me talking about him. A master of masters and a wonderful human being. So this is an introduction to this. When my book comes out, you'll get the details of how this works. And today we need to be clear on this system because it's under attack. Because of the forces that have hit Black communities and hit the African world, a lot of us have been taken out of this world and have become imitators of some of the worst stuff that we can think of. Death purveyors. Happy when they're killing. That's a minority. But the fact is, too many of our youth have this fear of living because death is so certain, you know? So we're in a different period. And if we are going to continue this, we have to appreciate what we have. We have to institutionalize it. We have to practice it, but not mess it up the way the jazz schools do. Not turn it into something that's so formalized that it has no meaning. It's a matter of, again, transmission of wisdom from mouth to ear, from master to novice. You understand? So that we can be the best human beings we can possibly be. Since we all have God within us, it's so that we can be more God-like. There's no arrogance in this, you know? So that if we have ourselves in order, we can play a better role in promoting cosmic order. And we got societal order that's so terrible. A lot of us don't think we have time to think about cosmic order, but we're the miniature cosmos and the larger one. So this is the mastery system that takes you higher and higher. And there's a whole lot more to this. I just gave you an introduction. But the key point is you don't get this unless you apply it. For people that want to understand Dogon philosophy better, I would suggest that you read a book called Conversations with Oba T'Shaka. Conversations with Oba T'Shaka. Ogotommeli. Oba T'Shaka. Get that. That's like an introduction to the Dogon system. It's all symbols. And it's best read in a group. That's what I used as a text for about 20 years. So this mastery path ain't for everybody. Everybody don't want to be a master. Some people just want to just be average. What a shame. You know what I mean? When you got God within you, you can never be what God is. You know what I mean? Just try and get better. What a shame to try and be average. Whatever you're good at, be the best at it. Whatever it is, that doesn't matter as long as you're trying to be the best. And this is the path to being the best, technically and as a human being. And being the human being, the good human being, is the most important part. You know, the most important part. So I want to encourage people that watch this show, and we got a habit. A lot of people watch the show and don't subscribe, and we haven't had one critical remark on this show in almost 2 years. There hasn't been one complaint. So it means that people who watch and don't subscribe, it ain't because they didn't not subscribe because they didn't like the show. They didn't push the subscriber button. Push the subscriber button. Do that. And those of you that can, and some of you have already, Robin and a number of others have made some donations. I appreciate it. Do it when you can, because it helps offset these costs. I can only go into my pocket so much. You know what I mean? Improve this show, it costs something. We're into capitalism, baby. I don't like capitalism, but hey, that's a reality. You got to pay. The mantra in relationships is, unfortunately, no finance, no romance. There may be romance, but it falls apart when there ain't no finances to back it up. That's why the Black family's in trouble right now, because the Black male ain't making enough to pay the rent, ain't got the sense to pay the rent. CENTS, not SENCE. So just as, you know, you got to get these family finances, personal finances going to get your family together. And that's part of rebuilding Black communities. And the twin lineal family model is key to that. So this show requires a little too. So that's it. Hotep. I would like to see if you got any comments or questions. Either one, put them up, you know. I see a higher hecker, no honey without that money. You can get it in the beginning, but it doesn't last very long because, I mean, let's face it, romance, I mean, on an empty stomach constantly is kind of difficult. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people living on empty stomachs around the world and shouldn't be. $1, $2 a day, and some aren't even getting $1 or $2 a day. And that's due to the way this world is structured to make the rich rich and the poor poor. And that's really the objective of this whole show, is to aid people in their effort to change that. So any comments or questions? This is the whole point. I mean, you know, we do a live show for this reason. So it's nice if you like it, but this is my way of learning when I get some stuff from you. Okay, Jeremy Pollitt, how do you find a system when you don't really identify with anything yet? Oh, okay, that's a real basic question. Good question. What I would say is delve more into your history and your culture. Delve more into it. And that will help. And I have an introductory reading list that I sent to people. So if you want it, then what you do is when you come back on the screen in this show, put your email address down there, and then I can send you this introductory reading list. What you need is to get more knowledge and understanding of yourself, and it may help you to identify with something. And then you have your own family, you have your own community, so you have these things. You have people in your life, I'm sure, who care about you. So there's also that gives you something to identify with. But the first thing to fall in love with is self-love. And if you're in love with yourself, you've got something. That's the big deal. You know what I mean? And everything else flows from that. You know what I mean? Loving yourself. And that comes from knowing yourself. And that leads to respect for yourself. So self-knowledge is really the key here. And so part of self-knowledge is knowing your history and your culture, both African, if you're African, and African American, or whatever your ethnicity is. So that's a part of it. Another part is look at yourself and ask yourself, what do you love about yourself? What is it that makes your eyes shine when you do it? What is it that makes you happy and that is good for other people? What is it? And it's usually following that. That's your wish. You know what I mean? What's your deepest wish? Usually, if you follow that in life, everything else is good. I don't care what happens. You hear me? If you're following that, your wish. Let's see. Brother Ugawa, what are some actions those seeking consciousness can undertake when dealing or friends who are hostile to our growth? That's a good question. One of the first things that people usually want to do when their eyes are opening up, when they become aware and they're awake, they want to wake everybody else up. And when you do that, you're going to run into opposition. Because first of all, people haven't gone through your experience, so they don't understand it. And they're usually going to resist. And then if it's like your mother and father, well, you got your nerve. You're my baby up here telling me this and telling me that, you know what I mean? So you're going to get some resistance. And then it's because you're on different tracks, different thought patterns, different philosophies. And so some people haven't gone through your experience, so they're going to resist it. So you got to be careful. First of all, be tolerant of people. And in the case of your parents, even though you're sharing what you've learned, don't get to the point where you're arrogant and you have to convert them. You can share what you know. And if they find it interesting, fine, they might do something with it. And if they don't, it's fine. You know what I mean? So be tolerant of the people you're around. The main thing is adopt the attitude of, I don't give a darn what you think about me, meaning don't let other people's attitude towards you turn you around. That's the key thing. Stay on your path and show people respect. And over time, some of them will come around. Some of them will say, you're crazy. You're undergoing this awakening. You're crazy. When you are sane, you're crazy. When you're insane, nothing wrong. We can recognize that. I remember because I went through that. You know, people talking about, oh, he's gone crazy. Crazy like a fox. So my attitude about that is, I don't care 2 cents about what somebody else thinks about my consciousness as long as I'm doing what's right or trying to do what's right. I care about criticism. If you got something to correct me on, I'm listening. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to work on it. But other than that, I don't care. You got to take that attitude. Take that attitude, and that ain't arrogance. You're satisfied in your own self. You're loving your own life. That's the key. And some people will start asking, well, how did you do that? How do I get that? You know what I mean? Um, okay, I just saw something else up here that went up. Wolf Manlu, good to see you, brother. What can I do better to gather the conscious community here in Chicago? What's coming to our planet will be devastating, and we will need to amass our resources and abilities. So you've proposed something, gathering the conscious community. So if you have some people that you want to pull together to help work on something in the community, do it. Also, reach out to some people that have done it before. I have a few friends in Chicago, so if you want to contact me, give me your email. I can give you a few contacts, but you probably know a number of them. So hook up with them. But if you got some stuff you want to do, then lay out what it is you want to do. Chicago's got over 600,000 Black people. It's still got a power base. A lot of Blacks have left Chicago, but a lot is still there. And I know most people that come from Chicago, it's like a nation. They're constantly going back. It's like a nation. It's a rich culture there, you know. So decide what you want to do. Hook up. If there's some groups in Chicago that are doing some positive things you want to join them. If you want to set something up yourself, set it up. And draw on some people that have some experience to help you out. Lao Tzu, how can we apply the Dogon system of mastery to our education system? Oh, well, I'm introducing you to it. You're asking the big question. It's a whole process, but it starts with understanding that it's an apprenticeship system, so you're coming up under masters. And so that's, first of all, is to know your gifts. At your age, I would assume you do, and who at a higher level matches up. That is, they have similar interests that you can work with. Now, you knew John Henrik Clarke, Professor John Henrik Clarke, so you worked with him. You're on this show, so whatever I can do, I can help you. But find people who are at this higher level that you can work with and draw from. And John Henrik Clarke said in his last years, the thing he regretted is he didn't have anyone else his age or older to work with. That was a regret, because John was always learning. And that's the thing about this process. It's lifelong. That's why it's heavier than just a classroom thing, Senegal TV, thank you so much, families. From Senegal, right on. Hey, hey, hey. SINI, Senegal TV. Have me on your show sometime. Even though I don't speak French, I'm sure you got a translator. Okay, let's see. Okay. So nice. Senegal, beautiful people. By the way, Senegalese people, they don't walk, they strut. They got some pride. Huh? Real pride, Let's see if there's any more. Oh, another thing I would suggest to the person who's saying, that question is, how do you find a system when you don't really identify with anything yet? I would also suggest with this show, I regard the show as chapters in a book. I do preparation for these shows. And so there are certain shows that sequence. And I would suggest that when you go in and look at some of these shows, like the shows on the Trois, there's a sequence to them. Watch the first one, then the second, third. There are 5 of them. Look at that. That's the origin of humanity. You might get a system or a sense of what you identify with through that, you know. Or there's the shows on the ANU, ANU. There's a sequence to that. The shows on the Haitian Revolution, there were two. It's a sequence to that. So some of the shows, watch the sequences and it'll help you. And then go do your own reading. And this is real key because people who are on the internet, that's good, particularly those who are drawing from good information. There's a lot of good information. But the ignorant, it's got just opinions out there, assumptions, ASS. That's what you sit on. That's not where you get your your truth. So in either case, but particularly, well, in either case, it's important that you read. Do your own homework. I'm putting stuff out. Check your own stuff out. You know what I mean? Do your homework. This is real key. And share it with people. Jeremy Pollock, first-time viewer. Yeah, and welcome, brother. Glad to have you. And he said, I just watched one earlier today. Right on, good. Higher Heka, Dogon priest character described here reminds me of the Chua. Yeah, except the difference is all the Chua had that. And so in societies that become more stratified, and the Dogons weren't that highly stratified, but stratified, then that higher wisdom is limited to a smaller group. The character is there for a lot, but the higher wisdom is limited to a smaller group. The Dogon, generally, the higher character is there with everyone. And I'm sure there are people more wise than others, better at certain things than others, as hunters, as gatherers, as family people, whatever. Lashonda, can we get it documented to be accepted curriculum like Montessori school? I mean, a Dogon school for the youth. Wow, that's a good idea. And Lashonda, I really appreciate your involvement in the show. You're really dedicated in your support for the show. That's a real good question. One of the reasons for having the two brothers on from Kansas City, the one who had led the movement to take control of the public schools, and then the other that has been the primary, one of two leaders that founded the after-school program, was that, and they've agreed, committed themselves to it, Ajamu Webster in the public schools and Leon Dixon in the after-school program. Having led the models in both areas, they've agreed to help do training if people want to set these up. And so that question of how do you put this in the schools, it's a good question. And the key is you have to master this. You have to undergo this. And if you have in your life, if you've had elders who are masters in certain areas and you've worked with them and learned things, then figure that out. Figure out where you are in this process, both in the sixfold stages and in the apprenticeship system. And it's when you've practiced this that you can teach this to other people, because this is a practice system. And that's what young people are looking for, is practice. So this is real key. So that's my suggestion. And Lashonda, if you have an interest in this, then share it with me. You can give me your email, whatever. We can contact and talk, because I'd like to know, what are you doing on this if you are, Oziah Kepo, greetings. Can you recommend literature covering the Chua? First of all, read the stuff on the Chua that have come in my shows, because this is breakthrough stuff. And then a real good book is The First Americans Were Africans. The First Americans Were Africans by David Imhotep. That's an extremely good book. And then read my writings, because the foundation of them is the Trois. So I'm dealing with them in different dimensions. The mother principle, in terms of how that translated into hunter-gatherer societies. Chapter 6 in that book especially focuses on that, but the whole book does. So those are the two that I would recommend. There's a lot of stuff up there, but I don't know if I'd recommend it. See if there's anything else. Yeah, thank you, LaShonda. Okay. Worley Smith, look within, discover and refine our genius. Yeah, that's the key thing. We're like gardens, so work on the garden. And we all got weeds, work on uprooting them. But work on your higher side. You know, part of the thing about growth is when we got something negative, you know, bringing us down, it may be a character flaw, not just other people out to do this and that to us. The best way to deal with that is to work on the higher side. That's the best way, the higher side. And you'll find that that will motivate you to do better. And that will take you higher and higher. That's one thing I liked about Tucson. With all his faults, that was something he was constantly working on, you know. Yeah, and Brother God was pointing out, my books can be purchased through Gumroad. If you click into the description of this show, you'll see a thing where you can order through Gumroad. And my books, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, The Art of Leadership, Volume 1, and The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, along with DVDs that are downloaded into your phone, Mastering the Masters, which, by the way, is one of the DVDs, which is an introduction in a different way of this system I'm describing today. It was a speech that I gave before ASCAT, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, over 20 years ago. And it's still it's relevant today. It's beautifully illustrated. So check that out. And then there's one on Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, a speech that I gave to introduce the book at Greater Amani Church in Memphis, Tennessee. And there's a book on Malcolm, there's a DVD on Malcolm X. Those can all be purchased through Gumroad, you know. And downloaded in the DVDs, we mail the books to you. Okay, so it looks like that's it. So I appreciate you all. I hope you enjoyed this jazz, because this is improvising and innovating, and see what you get out of it. And this one here is really important. You've got a mighty people, and that's African people everywhere. Mighty culture, you know. So appreciate it, study it, draw from it, live it, teach it to your children. And thank you, Robin. Okay, that's it. Hotep.